understand.
Honorable Minister, State Enterprise.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I want to thank the member for asking these very important questions. The subject of the sale of MVIL shares in BSP have been the subject of much discussion, even in the social media as well as the mainstream media. First, I want to clarify this, and that is that the government does not own any shares in BSP. Those shares were held by MVIL, a completely different company, a limited company, so we need to get that correct. It is not the government shares. Any investor which owns shares normally does a due diligence on investment it owns in publicly traded company, and BSP is no exception. And KCH, being the shareholder of all our SOEs, including MVIL, commissioned a study as soon as the Marape government took office in 2022. And that included a comprehensive review of all investments held by our companies, and particularly the investment or the shareholding held by KCH in BSP. KCH owns 18% in BSP, and KCH now is the largest shareholder in BSP, followed by a number of companies, including MVIL, which held 6%. So in the case of MVIL, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this due diligence study confirmed that, as we know, shares in a publicly traded company are subject to fluctuation. And although BSP has always been providing consistent dividends to the shareholders, including KCH and MVIL, it was decided that the government was overexposed in holding shares in only one company. It was also the intention of this government to establish another commercial bank to provide competition in the market. And it was felt that BSP was not able to provide full banking service right throughout the four corners of our country. And it was felt that there was a need for another bank. And that is why most of you are aware that this government, under this government, we have established another commercial bank, the National Banking Corporation. So we were in a situation where we did not want to expose everything to one shareholding in one commercial bank. The government decided to diversify. And the idea of selling shares in MVIL was mooted in cabinet. There were three separate NEC decisions. The first one directed MVIL to conduct a due diligence, an insolvency test, and that was done. It was then brought back to cabinet, and cabinet was satisfied that even with the selling of those shares, the government's entire shareholding through KCH and MVIL would not be affected. That was a decision that was made in principle. There were three separate NEC decisions. Becoming a shareholder and having a share in a publicly traded company does not guarantee you dividends all the time. Sometimes the company can make money, sometimes it can make reduced profit. So we felt it was time to sell down, but still maintain 3% equity in the shares. I must also inform this cabinet or this parliament that MVIL was gifted those shares. It never paid for those shares. It's important, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that I explain the background to how MVIL became a holder of those shares. When the Macquarie government merged the smaller BSP with the bigger PNGBC, it was decided that in return for that merger, the government was going to be allocated 30% shareholding in the new bank, the new BSP. And under the banking laws that we have in this country, not one single shareholder is allowed to own more than 20% in a commercial bank, because as we all know, commercial banks deal with other people's money. And it can be a risky business too. So it was then felt that to comply with the banking requirements, KCH was allowed to keep 20%, and 10% was allocated or gifted to MVIL. And that is how MVIL got those shares. MVIL never paid for the shares using the motor vehicle owners' insurance trust funds. That money, even now, after the sale of BSP, has never been touched. The money belonging to all the motor vehicle owners in this country has remained untouched, and it is still there. And MBL, as I speak, continues to hold a minimum of 300 million kina in cash every day. It is solvent all the time. But as I said earlier, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it was felt that there had to be a sell down, and there needed to be a sell down to be able to help KCH fund some of the projects that they have to be done. For instance, the aging infrastructure in PNG Power right throughout the country, not only in Port Moresby, but along the Island Highway and from Ley to Mereng, Wewak, Rabaul, everywhere. Most of the infrastructure is more than 30 years old. I keep telling this Parliament, and many people think it's an excuse, but there is a fact that we have to have money to be able to fund those projects. And the revenue that is being earned by PNG Power is not alone, and that is why this government, under the leadership of our Prime Minister, already made a decision in December last year to partially sell down PNG Power. And selling down a company like that is not straightforward. You need to engage all the experts who will value the company. It is not about selling PNG Power at a fire sale. We have to get value for our money. And it is going through a process now. But in the case of funding some of that infrastructure, we were able to secure a loan from ADB under the title ADB SOE Reform Loans. And that was 500 million kina, or $1 million. Unfortunately, due to misunderstanding with Treasury and the National Planning Department 2 years ago, most of the money did not get to SOEs. What do you expect me to do when these things happen in government? You have to have other ways of raising funds. And this is one SOE raising funds, selling down its shareholding to allocate money to free up cash so that other SOEs are bailed out. Gone are the days when SOEs will continue to rely on government funding through the national budget. We appreciate that there are the more competing needs, law and order, education, and these are supposed to be earning money. And when you have a situation where most of them are bleeding cash, you go for the low-hanging fruit. It makes economic sense. And that money, the proceeds of the sale, will be put to good use. And Cabinet has already allocated or approved the allocation of each separate expenditure items. Not one single toya will be misused. All of that money will be put to good use, and it's subject to an oversight committee by KCH. So the money will be put to good use. So, as I said earlier, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you can be a shareholder in a company, but that does not necessarily mean that you hold those shares forever and ever. As an investor, it comes to a time when you can make that investment decision to sell those shares at a price that is good. When the shares are performing well, you sell out and make the money, not when the bank shares are not performing well. So that was a commercial decision made by the boards of both MBL and KCH, and then finally approved by a cabinet. All the necessary processes were followed. Now, to answer the last question of how there was no public notice in the media inviting everyone to buy shares. Now, this is an area where you engage expert stockbrokers to do the selling for you. These are publicly traded companies, not a government auction process. This is a publicly traded company, BSP, where you hold shares. So JMP nominees, who are a locally based broker, that we have two brokers in this country, Kina Securities and JMP. And JMP was engaged to conduct a sale process. And the sale process of shares held in a public company is not that straightforward. You have the usual process of know your customer, so that ultimately you know that you are selling your shares, ultimately not to a criminal who is using another company as a front or using a sham to hide his shareholding, but you have to know who you're selling to. So that process took 1 year. It took 1 year. It didn't take 6 months. And no politician was involved. Ultimately, the brokers were engaged and they did a thorough job in conducting that sale process through those who had the resource and the money. And they had a time frame. So ultimately, if we were to read what appeared in the postscript on 18th July, Friday 18th July, you will see that most of the shares were bought by MRDC group of companies. MRDC group of companies ultimately, the group of companies are trustee managers who manage equity and business interests for our landowners ranging all the way from Oktedi, our LNG plant site landowners here, and up the resource areas up in the upper islands. So you have a mix of shareholding representing our landowners. About 30% of the shares were then, of that parcel of shares were then acquired by local businesses in this country. Local business. We made it a condition of the sale that none of the shares would be sold to foreigners. So as a result, what you see, if you care to check the register of BSP, is that the largest shareholder in BSP is KCH, which ultimately owns MJL, followed by the MRDC group companies. They have become the second largest shareholders. And then down the line, you have our Nest Fund and all the others, also including MJL. And Mr. Speaker, I also want to inform Parliament that there is another 4% shareholding held by MJL, which was then pledged by MJL to borrow shares from Nest Fund under an equity monetization contract that was entered into before our time in 2018. So if you look at it, and if you look at it ultimately, even after the disposal of 3% shareholding in BSP by MJL, MJL will still be left with 7% ultimately after the conclusion of those court cases involving MJL, Nest Fund, and KCH. So all in all, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to conclude by saying that despite and contrary to what others are claiming to be, even to the, especially those uninitiated who don't even understand how stock market operations operate and why businesses own shares in companies like BSP, this decision was made to actually empower KCH to fund all the other projects. KCH still has a pipeline of project worth $1 billion kina, which has to be spent. And we are not in the business of running to government again. We don't want to ask the government for funding again. And that is why that decision was made to sell the shares. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.